Hi everybody, welcome to topic 1 of Unit 2. Unit 2 is this second part of the class. That's clever. That's the second section we're calling Unit 2, where we're going to explore the concept of sports space. This is something that was developed by a trio of academics about 15 years ago to try and measure the impact a sport might have in a given society and to assess whether you can infinitely add sports to a space and have them matter, or how that all plays out. What's the relationship between sports and international affairs? Can you predict how they will play together and work together into the future? I really like the concept they've come up with as a tool to describe what we're aiming to understand. So if you get through Units 1 and 2, or topics 1 and 2 of Unit 2, and don't understand sports space yet after doing the reading and pondering it and watching the lectures, then please be sure you're in touch with me, because it is important you understand it for the rest of the sports international affairs class to make a lot of sense. All right, so let's start here. Let's talk about the sports effect and why this matters. So you're trying to understand through sports space whether a sport can be politicized and whether it can be used to various ends. So the junta is a group of military leaders who came to power in Argentina in 1976, and different iterations of them led for the country for 5 years, and they enacted on something called the Dirty War almost right away. The Dirty War was actually conducted against its own citizens to root out what they considered to be the unpleasant and inappropriate parts of their society. In their case, it was the left. You've had other military juntas come to power that actually rule from the left and go after the right. But in this case, this junta is arch-conservative, and they're going after the left. And they happen to have something drop into the laps in World Cup 1978. They were supposed to host it, and what they understood was if they used sports as a tool of what they were trying to do, that people around the world who may or may not be concerned, a lot of them were, but a lot of them weren't, concerned with what they were doing in the Dirty War, would actually be convinced by the success of the World Cup that they weren't such bad guys after all, that they were delivering something that mattered to a lot of people, and that would overcome a lot of the other concerns. Now that works on one level, but because it was in the sports space of Argentina and in the sports space of a lot of the countries around the world, it meant that the sport itself, the event itself, rose to the attention of people who might not otherwise have cared a whit about what was going on in Argentina. For a lot of people, there's just too many negative things going on in the world, and they don't have time to be concerned with what happened in all of them, so the ones that rise to their attention are the ones that get sort of action from an individual. And because soccer is in the sports space of a lot of people, again, we'll talk about sports space here again in a minute, the sports effect means that they would pay attention to what's going on in Argentina differently than they would have if sports wasn't happening, or the World Cup wasn't happening there. So on the one hand, you've got the event happening in Argentina in 1978. That's the poster from the event there. On the other hand, it means that you're going to have cover stories in Sports Illustrated. Now, at the time in the United States, there are a lot of people not paying any attention at all to what was going on in Argentina. But when you have an article about the World Cup, because of the sports effect, you also end up with articles about the junta and what's going on. So it goes both ways. If a sport is in an individual nation sports space, they can politicize it in certain ways. And we'll look at a lot of that in topic 3 of this unit. But if it's in a global sports space, then you can do even more things, which we'll look at in topics 4 and 5. But the sports effect means that more people will pay attention to something that's going on if it's associated with sport than if it's not. So it worked for the junta, and it didn't work for the junta, and we'll look at the junta again later in the class as well. So here's a quick overview. This is your pocket definition you should have written down. I put it on the intro to topic 1. You should have written that down already. If not, write it down again. But we're trying to measure, right? What's the capacity of people to care, to be motivated? So what this means is you can't look at participation numbers and say, okay, that's in the sports space, right? You can't say, okay, because there's more youth soccer players in the United States than there is other sports, that means that there's soccer is in the American sports space, because it's not enough to motivate enough people politically, economically, socially, or emotionally, or in some other way by that sport. So it doesn't quite work. Okay, so let's look at 1997 to get sort of an example. So you're talking about something that's going to motivate people to act. In 1997, Paul Allen, who's the current owner of the Seahawks, he offered to buy the team, but he did it with a requirement that the taxpayers of Washington agree to tear down the Kingdome and build a state-of-the-art stadium in its place, right? So he asked the voters to decide whether they would accept their own tax base. So initially, they put forward a proposal to build what's now CenturyLink Field, was Seahawks Stadium, then Qwest Field, then CenturyLink Field, and he requested us to vote to basically add a $300 million bill onto the tax rolls. Well, enough people care about football that he got to about 48% estimated were going to vote for the proposal, which means it was going to fail. So they quickly redrafted the proposal to include soccer. So I was going to vote no, right? Because in my interest, the NFL was not in my interest. Having a new stadium in Seattle was not in my interest. But soccer is in my interest. And when they were going to build a state-of-the-art facility that could host World Cup games and could host an MLS team, then yeah, I was interested to tax myself. It motivated me to act in a different way because soccer is in my sports space. So what does that mean overall? Does it mean that soccer matters? No, because what you're trying to measure is society-wide, does something matter? What you just proved in that example was that 3% of our population in Washington, at least in 1997, had soccer in its space. We were willing to tax ourselves. So the good news for the people in the Vote Yes campaign for the tax initiative means that the state of Washington went from disfavoring it about 52 to 48 to favoring it 51 and a half to 48 and a half. So that means it mattered, right? It mattered because there were 3% of the population that was going to vote for it. But it doesn't mean that soccer is in the sports space. What you successfully measured is whether I would be motivated and the other 3% would be motivated by sports, by soccer to include it. Now, you were looking then at the other side that football itself, having a football stadium, that was enough to motivate about 48% of the population. So that NFL piece did mean enough to someone to make it matter. And you can say then that you had that rough number of people for whom it mattered in the society. So again, you're talking about that measurement. Will it make us do something? So it could be on a personal, a local, or regional level. And we're going to talk about these as we go forward. But really, the whole class is looking at what's on a national and international level. What sports can you manipulate if you want to, or can you predict will be manipulated by outside forces because enough people care about them. So on a personal or local level, you can have any sorts of sports that are inside, right? So for me personally, a lot of soccer is in my sports space, but it doesn't mean that it translates to a local or regional or a national or international level. Now it happens that my sport, soccer, leaps and is on an international level and is on a lot of national levels, but in the United States it doesn't fit on the most local or most regional levels or even the national level. In event, the World Cup does matter, but we'll look at how that differs here in a minute. So for me personally, it can motivate me to do a lot of things. Like I pay attention to such things as who sponsors my team. Should I buy their tires? Should I go to those hotels? Should I patronize them with my dollars? Right? Should I talk about them? Do I think about them in different ways? And the answer is yes. So on a personal level, anybody can have anything in their sport and in their sports space, or have none, right? There are a lot of people for whom there's no sports that really matter. Now, the most common one in the United States, replicated the most number of sports spaces, is the number of local levels where high school, football in particular, matters in a lot of countries. Now, it doesn't mean the numbers of people are the same as, say, attend a NASCAR event, but if you look at how many people in how many places across the whole country care about high school football, either the 8-man variety or the 11-man variety, that number is significant. And some would suggest that local football, then, is the thing that's in the most sports spaces. The trick is that none of us here, unless there's a random person from Unity, Oregon taking this class, none of us here, even though football itself might be in our sports spaces, 8-man football in Unity, Oregon is not. So you can't really motivate us to do much or motivate things. But a lot of people will link back to that if they're in that locale or not. Okay, so as the scale gets larger, the number of sports that can be in the space decreases. Okay, so it's a finite space because there's just only so much room, quote unquote room. And again, you need to read Tomlinson, Markovitz, and Young to understand what they're talking about there better. But there's so much room for people to care. Once you get past that amount, then there's no more room for it. It tends to be that team sports are replicated in more sports spaces than individual sports, just for the reason that that those team sports are things to which you can aspire differently, feel differently, that you can compete. You can be a part of a team. You can feel included than with individuals. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't individuals or sports made up of individuals who are in sports spaces in different places. For example, in the Bahamas or in Kenya, where runners matter. Those are individuals. Now, they do compete as part of a team if they're on relays or whatnot, but it's still an individual sport. Most places, the individual sports don't make the cut. Now, there are ways to make individual sports team sports. We've already mentioned once in this class. We'll mention again, like in tennis with the Davis Cup, where where nations compete against each other. In the America's Cup yachting, it's hard for the average American to care about yachting because the average American doesn't have much connection with a lifestyle or with an income level that would permit us to be yachters. But there have been times in American history where the America's Cup yacht race has risen to the fore and mattered a lot on a popular level. Certainly in the 1980s, it was something that mattered to a lot of people. So generally speaking, these things, team sports work better than individual sports, generally speaking. And generally speaking, event-based sports there's more sports that work in events than work as the sport themselves. Now, it's clear that there are many people in the United States for whom figure skating, or in Europe, this is a European picture, for whom figure skating matters. But there's a lot more people for whom the event of figure skating in the Winter Olympics matters even more. So in a lot of sports, for a lot of instances, what you'll see is people misunderstanding interest, say, in the 1999 Women's World Cup, which was massive in the United States, as interest in women's soccer. What people became interested in was the U.S. national team playing in the Women's World Cup. And that's replicated now. We just finished the World Cup in 2015. Massive support for the Women's World Cup. And the question is, can this be followed upon? Can people still be interested in, say, a local women's soccer league, a national women's soccer league? And so far, it's the event that matters. Maybe the team, but it's the team in the event that matters more than the sport itself. Right, so we've got team sports that seem to matter more often, and events that matter in a lot of sports more than others. Now, there'll be some sports that are that people care about a lot. So you could have people who care more about their local leagues, their national leagues, and they care about an event. For a lot of in a lot of countries, they would rather actually watch their local soccer team play to play in a national league than watch the World Cup. But in the United States, we have a lot of events that matter. So you just have to be careful to say, oh, that's that sport that matters, when maybe it's the event that matters. Right? There are different levels of interest in the United States in NFL, in the National Football League, than there are people who are interested in the Super Bowl. So you have to gauge whether you're interested in the Super Bowl or the sport. And that changes in ebbs and flows based on individuals, etc. How do we measure this? Okay. We have to talk about this over the next several units. Read Tumblison, Markovitz, and Young. Think about this again. Read my pocket definition. Understand there's a sports space that is limited. It's finite, not unchanging, meaning you could have one sport in one decade that matters and another sport that matters differently. Right? Boxing matters a lot differently now than it mattered when I was growing up, certainly. And in the United States, you used to have horse racing that mattered on a national scale a lot differently than it matters now. So if the sport's going to matter, then it has to be more than event oriented, and it has to generate this passion. What does that passion mean? That's tough. We have to figure that out, right, by reading these things and figure out. What we're trying to do is to look at the relationship between sports and international affairs, and both be predictive and to understand why governments will turn to certain sports instead of others. Why will you have certain sports that they say, we're going to work on that and we're going to try and accomplish certain international aims through that sport? Or why would you say this sport represents me as a regime, but that sport does not? And it's because of their link to try and tie back to the populace. It's a strange truism that even dictatorial regimes want to be loved. Not always. Most of them want to be loved, so that they want to tie themselves to the sport that their country, their society loves the most, because that'll give them the most people interested in them and their aims too. Sports space. This is just an introduction. We've got to talk about it, though. We've got to make sure that by the end of 2.2, you more or less get it. Then we'll look at applications in 2.3 and 2.4, both on the domestic scale and the international scale. Sports space, it matters, and it'll help us understand more about sports and international relations, sports and international affairs, if you get it. I just have to find it.